You know what really makes us mad is wasting money on CDs with only one or two good songs.
Yeah. Tell them about punk.
What's up, posers? Welcome to punklottopod. I'm your co-host, Justin Hensley.
I'm your other co-host, Dylan Hensley.
And we're back. It has been a minute since Dylan and I have recorded an episode. Thanks, internet.
Many things.
Yeah, really a lot of stuff has happened. And we're just now being able to finally record something again. So, yeah, been a busy couple weeks here at the House of Hensley's. Each one.
A house divided.
But yes, we're here, and I guess I could say that the premise of the show, this is the show where we assign our guests a year and they choose one punk, hardcore, emo, or punk adjacent album from that year for us to discuss. Today we're joined by Jolie Lindholm of the band The Darling Fire. And what are we talking about today?
We are talking about the year 1996, and the album is Static Prevails by Jimmy Eat World, the second Jimmy Eat World album. Working our way back through their discography, we need somebody to pick the self-titled record. I've definitely never heard that one.
No, never heard the self-titled record. Yeah, it's funny. We went years without covering a Jimmy Eat World record, and then now we've done one in less than a year. Two of them in less than a year. Yeah, fun record. I guess it's a overlooked album in their discography, so it's kind of neat to look at there. If you head over to our Patreon, you can get all of our weekly bonus audio. So we're going to do a modern rock chart dive from the Billboard magazine for the week corresponding with this one, 1996. I'll have to look at the actual date to see, but week ending here, the 18th, now in the present, but it'll probably be more like the 15th or 16th, but we'll figure that out when we get on there. But yeah, those are fun. We like to go through those. And last time we did it, we just kind of just watched the videos for every song and then kind of riffed on them as we went. But we'll see if we do that again. And then every Friday I do a new release Friday where I talk about the albums that came out that day, or at least that week. And then there's all sorts of other stuff on there. There's Moon Pies for Misfits, where I try out drinks primarily. That's what I've done on theirs. I've got a bunch of them I just uploaded, and I have some written material out there too. I've done the top 5 albums of January and the top 5 albums of February 2023, so you can check those out as well. You can also follow us on all forms of social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at punklottopod, punklottopod@gmail.com, and our voicemail line, 202-688-PUNK. Call us and leave us a message, and enjoy the show and the conversation we have with Jolie from The Darling Fire.
To my
joined here today by Jolie Lindholm of the band The Darling Fire. Jolie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
How's your day going?
It's going pretty good so far.
Yeah.
Nice and cool outside and can't complain.
Where are you located currently?
At the moment, I'm in Georgia, actually, near Atlanta.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Is the band out of Florida, right?
Yes, the band is based in Florida.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Yeah. It was funny. I was trying to think of the first time I heard of the band. And interestingly enough, I actually saw a Facebook sponsored ad about the Darling Fire before I'd heard of you, or even the labels that I follow, I guess, weren't sharing about you yet at that point. So in case you're ever wondering if those things work, they do apparently.
Interesting. Okay. That's pretty cool.
I think it was during the first record, the Spartan record promotion. Mm-hmm. So that's probably the first time I saw, because I remember listening to that record not too long after too.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's interesting.
And it was one of those things where I guess one of the hooks of the band, whenever you're kind of introducing them to new people, is you kind of give the rundown of the band's accolades and like past bands that they've been involved with. And for those listening, Darling Fire consists of members of bands such as Shai Hulud, Further Seems Forever, Poison the Well, As Friends Rust, your other band, The Rocking Horse Winner. So many bands to make up a really impressive resume. What is that like whenever you have to kind of like, you hooked them with the knowledge of what bands that you know people were involved with? What is that like trying to then convert that into like, hey, but my new band is great and everyone should be listening to him?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like our music sounds nothing like our previous bands.
Right.
So it's hard to like, I mean, some people think that we sound somewhat like some of our other bands, but I feel like it sounds nothing like them. So yeah, it's hard to like pull away from that. I feel like it's one way to hook them in, but then once they listen to it, they make their own assumption, and we're trying to kind of take those training wheels off now at this point. So yeah, because like I said, especially this new album doesn't sound like those bands at all, in my opinion. So yeah, it is challenging though, always to kind of pull away from that. We kind of had that with Rocking Horse Winter also, where there's the label wanted to use my connection to Dashboard Confessional. And we had to kind of, we were trying to establish ourselves separately from that. So there's always going to be that challenge to kind of pull away from that.
Is it ever frustrating, or are you kind of like, well, people gave us a chance because of those past bands?
Oh, no, it's not frustrating. I mean, it's definitely part of our history. So I can't, I'm not upset about it or anything like that. But it's interesting to me when people find us and they know nothing about those bands, which has been happening more, it feels like. So, so that's kind of cool to also have people listening to the album that don't even know who our previous bands are. But yeah, it's never anything that we're frustrated with. It's part of our history. So yeah, we can't complain about that.
Yeah. And that was my first thing I took away when I heard the Darling Fire at first. I was like, okay, yeah, it doesn't really sound like most of those bands. There are elements, I guess, that are there just because you're always going to have, what made you your previous band. It's going to show up in some way. But yeah, it's definitely, I guess, to describe it, I'd say the group leans more alternative rock crossed with like post-hardcore. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's interesting to me also to hear what people think we sound like, because being inside, from the inside, it's like hard for me to describe to people what we sound like, and everybody takes something different from it. But yeah, I think what you're saying is fair, definitely.
Yeah, it is always funny when Dylan and I used to be in a band, like people would tell us things that we sounded like, and I would always be like, really? That's that's not what I would have said.
The fun ones were always like, someone compares us to something that I don't think we sound like, but I like. And then I'm like, oh, cool. You hear that?
Yeah. No,
I don't.
Yeah, that happens too. Yeah, that definitely happens. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, everybody has their own idea of what we sound like, and that's awesome. I love to hear that.
Yeah, because like everybody makes completely different comparisons too. Like it's because it's whatever frame of reference each person has. You're just gonna get like, well, what's the closest thing to that, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And we all have different influences, so we're bringing those to the table, which are all over the board probably.
Yeah. I was looking back at kind of seeing who was playing with what members of which bands prior to the Darling Fire, and I saw that you and Geronimo, your bandmate, were also in the Rocking Horse Winter together. And then I looked and saw that band started in '99.
Yes.
So what is it like playing with someone for? I'm not gonna say that you've played continuously with them for 20 years, but what is it like, having such a long-standing relationship with another, musician that you write with?
Well, I don't know if you know this or not, but we're married actually now.
Well, that actually makes a lot more sense then.
Yeah. So we actually got together during Rocking Horse Winter, and we've been together since then. I still was doing things musically, but after, when Rocking Horse broke up, he sold everything and stopped doing music completely until this band. But yeah, I mean, this was the first time that we actually started writing together, just the two of us. With Rocking Horse Winter, it was like the guitarist was writing a lot of the music, and the vocals and everything, were mostly him. So this was the first time that we actually worked on something together, and it was the first time that he wrote songs on guitar as well. So it's been an interesting thing. But yeah, we have a long history, and that definitely helps with creating music. And it's easier because we live together to write the music. So
yeah. Do you have kind of like a pattern or a rhythm the way you write music together?
Basically, I mean, he'll start writing something and then he'll show it to me, and then sometimes we kind of work from there with like a piece of music, and we add some vocals to see where it goes. Other times, he'll finish a complete song and then we'll start working on the vocals. So it's kind of like we don't really have a set pattern, but he'll show me something and then we'll see whether or not it's going to work and go from there. And sometimes I can just start, something comes to me right away vocally to put over it. And other times I'm like, I need to hear more of the song in order to start working on it, So yeah, but he starts on his own with something late at night, usually.
Yeah.
So.
Do you find it hard to come up with the vocal, melodies for your songs? Or is it something that you're like, do you struggle at it, or is it something that like kind of comes more natural?
I think, it depends on the music. Some songs, something right away will click, and other songs I will write something and we'll decide that it's a little too like pop or something. It's like I have this pop sensibility that sometimes I have to control. That's just natural, I guess, and that's not what we want for this band necessarily. So, sometimes I'll write something and it'll turn into something completely different by the end of the song. So, and also I've been trying to challenge myself more and more with as time goes on with the songwriting. So I guess, to answer your question, it's like sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's more difficult and challenging.
Dylan, when you're writing songs, is it hard for you to get a melody right, or do you just like it just comes to you based on whatever the song is?
I usually don't try to write very complicated melodies. I need to be able to sing it. It's kind of my guiding rule. So wherever it goes when I'm writing it, and then I think it's one of those things where it's like sometimes you need to like write something that's like very specifically melodic and like is doing its own thing that's separate from the music, and other times it's just the song just needs the most, just kind of a standard, what comes naturally, what most people would come up with. I don't think everything needs to be like trying to show off the extent of my vocal range.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Yep.
The only reason why I ask those questions is because I've never been a singer really in a band, so like it's always felt like magic whenever I think of people coming up with melodies. Like, how do you do that? That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, something I'll say too is sometimes like a word will work somewhere, and I'll kind of write around that, or something. Some parts of the songs, on Distortions like just came out, and it wasn't like I sat down and worked on it for weeks, So sometimes just I like the way a word sounds, like the sound of something, Sometimes it just happens that way.
Yeah. That makes sense too, because I also remember being younger and like reading lyrics to like albums, and then noticing that like some lyricists will drop words out of when they're singing it, but when they wrote it, they actually had the word in there. And it always threw me when I was younger. I was like, what? Did they mess up on the lyrics? But no, it was just easier to sing it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely, it is fun though. It's a lot of fun to have like a blank canvas, a song, and just like sit down and see what comes out, see what happens.
Yeah. Well, the record is called Distortions, and it came out at the tail end of last year on Iodine Recordings, and I recommend that everyone listening check it out. You managed to get radio play off of this album, which in 2023 is always kind of interesting. How has that been for you?
Yeah, that's been interesting. Iodine started working with Pirate, and they were able to get us some radio play, and we've been fortunate to have certain stations continue to play the songs, and it's been interesting because the album came out last year and the radio stuff just started like in the last month or so. So it's cool to see how that grows and getting some new ears, but it's been really fun to see which stations pick it up and what they think about the album, and we made a couple of charts, which was really interesting. I mean, we didn't have that with the last album, so it's been kind of a cool adventure.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I'm currently doing an internship at a radio station, and it's radio isn't as big as it used to be as far as I guess just people just tuning in regularly. So I'm always curious how bands who are more like independent can get out there with that kind of audience. And I mean, even though like people say they don't listen to the radio, I mean, there's a lot of people who do still as their primary means, and it's always interesting to see who makes it, what makes it, because a lot of stuff's like corporate owned now, and it's harder to get into the playlists because they just play whatever it is that they've always played,
Yeah. Playlisting is a whole other animal. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's interesting because I don't listen to radio very often. Occasionally I'll have, XM or something like that. But as far as like FM and college radio, I don't really listen to it myself. So it's been kind of cool to have that, added to our band, which, something we've never explored before, and getting some new listeners from that is really interesting.
So the Darling Fire has a handful of dates coming up this spring and summer. Who are you playing with? I think I got an email about that.
Yeah, so we're playing Launch Music Conference. That's mid-April. And then in June, from the 9th, actually it was just confirmed on the 9th through the 13th, we're playing some dates with Spotlights, which is nice. Pretty awesome. Yeah. So we're pretty excited about that. I
saw the one post about playing with Jillian Carter too on that show.
Yes, that one is with Jillian Carter also, and that's Will's Pub in Orlando, and we played there a few times actually. So yeah, that should be awesome.
I'm unfamiliar with this Launch Music Conference. I'll have to look more into this. It makes me think of the old CMJ music conferences, if you remember those.
Yes, exactly. We played CMJ actually.
Oh wow.
Rocking Horse did. Yeah.
Yeah, that would make sense, right?
Yeah.
That's cool. I have to look more into that myself.
Yeah, it should be awesome.
Anything else you're allowed to talk about upcoming with the band?
We're discussing a possible second video for one of the songs. I don't know if I should say yet which song, but we're discussing that. We're just working on, storyboarding a concept for that, and that should be a lot of fun. We're also writing music again, so I don't know when that will be released, but we're trying to possibly get something out by the end of the year again. But yeah, we're just looking to play as many shows as we can this year, work on music, and possibly put out that video.
And if anyone listening hasn't seen any of the Darling Fire videos, they look amazing. The production value on these is fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So the video that we did for the last album was a lot of fun. And that was done in basically 1.5 days, believe it or not. So, the same thing with the video for Rituals for this album. We did that with Toddy Babu, and that came out, he exceeded our expectations on that video. And that was recorded in just, 8 hours, basically.
Wow.
But he did a phenomenal job on that.
Yeah, they look great. So if everyone's interested, check out the show notes. I'll have links to all the Darling Fire's accounts online and all that good stuff. So everyone should check them out. They're absolutely awesome. And we can get on with the rest of the show. So the premise of the show is we assign our guests a year, and they choose one album from that year for us to talk about. So before we get into the record that you selected, I assigned you the year 1996. And before we get to your album, let's talk about some other records that came out that year. Did you have any others that you were considering before you landed on the one you did?
I did. I mean, I'm probably going to pick things that wouldn't typically be picked from that year because, of course, there's, I didn't even realize how much came out that year, how many great albums.
Yeah.
So I guess at the time I was listening to VOD, Vision of Disorder.
Oh, yeah. Because
I'm from Long Island originally. I don't know if you know that, but so I was listening to VOD back then, and I didn't realize that their first, I think it was their first album came out that year, or their self-titled.
Yeah.
But I really loved that band because they had it was like the singing and the screaming, and just something about their music had just a lot of, it was different for me at the time. So that was one that I was considering and probably wouldn't be typical from that year. And then, of course, Propagandhi, Less Talk, More Rock came out that year. Yeah. So I was listening to a lot of hardcore and punk at the time. I didn't listen to that album as much as How to Clean Everything.
Right.
But I did listen to it. I do have the vinyl still actually from that time. And and later on, we did actually, Rocking Horse did a little run with Weaker Thans, which was John Sampson from Propagandhi.
Yeah.
So, but that was also a great album at the time.
What when you did a run with the Weaker Thans, what would have been out by then?
I think, let me see. It was, I still go back and listen. So it was actually in 2000 when we did a run with them. I think it was Left and Leaving.
Okay, yeah, that would have.
Yeah, so we had a little run with them, and that was awesome. They're a great band also. But that's much later than
yeah,
in this year.
Yeah, because the first Weaker Thans is in 97. That's Fallow. But yeah, I'm jealous of anyone who ever got to see Weaker Thans because I didn't see them when they were still a band, and I've yet to see John K. Sampson either because he doesn't tour extensively. But I'm always jealous of people who got to see them live because they're one of my favorite bands. Yeah,
it's a great band. I mean, yeah, and it's I don't have a very strong memory of that time, but I do remember doing that run and being in awe that we were actually doing something with members of Propagandhi.
Right.
It was surreal, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah, those are interesting picks, especially considering what the band you're in now sounds like, and the album you chose.
Exactly. That's what I mean. I was listening to things all over the place. I mean, another album that I have the vinyl of, and is probably not a typical pick, is Focal Point, Suffering of the Masses, because I remember, it's funny because recently we were writing something, my husband and I was like, I remember this part in this album, Focal Point, and I couldn't find it. And then I finally found it, and it's the song Upright, and there's like a bass drop. I don't know if you remember that part, but it's always stuck with me. There's like this crazy, and I listened to it today again because I wanted to remember that, and it's not the same in headphones. Like at the time, it was just like this crazy, just bass drop. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
I don't remember.
It's been a while since I've heard that record.
It's funny. I just talked about Focal Point on a Patreon audio where I was covering This Is Solid State Volume 2, the compilation. And the very last song on there is like a Focal Point song, which was funny because the comp was like 01, but that Focal Point record was 96. So it was just like they were trying to pad out the playtime, I guess. But
trying to sell copies of the CDs that were sitting around, probably.
Yeah. So I mean, that's another great album. It was just such a great time for music. There's so much good music. Another one that's completely different is Trans Am. Actually, they put out an album at that time, and I listened to it again, and I didn't listen to them at the time, but I didn't listen to them until later, in '99 probably. But that album has just a mix of like rock and electronic that's really unique. It's kind of like Kraftwerk influenced, I guess.
I don't know that one. This is a self-titled album. Okay, interesting. Yeah. I have to check that out.
Yeah, it looks like it might be their first album. It was on Thrill Jockey. Yeah, so like I said, all over the place with range at the time. Yeah, I mean, there's so much great music. Jawbox put out an album, Far.
Yeah, Darling Fire worked with Jay Robbins too, which I've heard of other people working with him too, and he just sounds like a really awesome, individual to work with.
Yeah, he was awesome to work with. It was one of my favorite experiences recording vocals, actually. And he doesn't really, tell you what to do, but he does give little ideas here and there. Like he doesn't really produce as much, which is cool. He lets you do your thing, but he definitely brought out some great things in the music. And, there's a specific like backup part that he suggested that I do, and it was so great, but unfortunately it gets a little lost in the mix, but it was like a really cool little backup at the end of one of the songs. And yeah, it was fun to work with him. He's very like, dedicated to what he does, and he's pretty quiet, but he has good ideas. And if something sounds awkward, in the music, he'll say, why don't you try this instead? And so yeah, he was great to work with.
It's interesting because he's worked with tons of people, and there's not this specific like sound that you tend to think of with Jay Robbins produced records, like other than just like they all sound great, but like he isn't one of those producers where you're like, it's not like an Albini where you're like, oh yeah, that's an Albini thing, there's no like, oh yeah, that's a Jay Robbins trick, it just. So I'm always curious about his production style versus other bigger name producers, I guess.
Yeah. It's probably because he records all different kinds of music, and they bring, like we had an idea of what we wanted, but we were still developing our sound at the time too. But he did bring some really cool things in. He did record certain things to tape and then bring it back into the music, which was cool. Gives it a certain warm element to it. So yeah, it was really fun to work with him.
Yeah. So in 1996, we've actually covered this year a couple times in the past, which usually, that happens when you've been doing the show for almost 5 years now. So we have covered previously the Aquabats, Return of the Aquabats, which we also, that was in our old format where we also did EPs, and we did Darkest Hours, the Misanthrope EP, which like super early Darkest Hour EP. We also did Refused Songs to Fan the Flames of Discontent. We did that with Susan Plant of the band Faye. We did Bikini Kill's Reject All American, which we did that with Susie True, the LA band. Dylan and I did The Crown Hate Ruins Until the Eagle Grins. We did that one by ourselves. And we did Social Distortion, White Light, White Heat, White Trash with John from Timeshares. And Chavez, Ride the Fader with Ryan from Extra Arms. So 96 is a year we've hit quite a few times. Dylan, what are some other ones that kind of stand out to you on here?
That's such an interesting list of records to have talked to hear them listed that way. Like really running the gamut of 96. Let me see. What's the only I feel like there's maybe like one other major category that we just haven't really touched on. And I'm trying to think of what stands out as unique from that list. Not much, really. We really have.
Yeah, we've hit all the, like, I guess the quadrants of styles, you know, ska, post-hardcore, riot girl, emo, whatever you call social distortion, rock and roll. Chavez in there. I guess, I don't know how you would even describe Chavez's sound. Yeah, we've kind of hit a lot of the big ones. I guess we didn't do like pop punk. That's probably like
that's the only other big thing is. So I guess there's like some MXPX and there's some. I feel like Social Distortion is not even that far from pop punk.
Yeah.
What are the big records of 96? Pinkerton.
Yeah. Oh, Jolie, do you have an opinion on Pinkerton?
I haven't really listened to it as much as other Weezer albums. I mean, I did like, I did love Weezer back then, definitely, but I'm not as familiar with that album.
It's funny. I asked that too, because there's like a very specific type of like music fan that is obsessed with Pinkerton. And I was just curious because Dylan and I are not that type of fan. We don't really care for that record. And it's always I always want to see like who else is in that same boat as us.
Yeah. I'm looking at it right now and there aren't none of these songs really stick out to me as favorites, So yeah. I'm probably with you on that.
It's that one record that people get really into. You're either really into it or you're like, yeah, I think I've heard it. What's on there? I don't know these songs. Descendants put out Everything Sucks. I guess that's your kind of your big red letter pop punk record.
Yeah.
Braid released The Age of Octane. That's a pretty big record. It's kind of deep back here. I'm surprised it was not as high up on the list as it was.
It is a pretty good year for the kind of music that we're talking about with the record that we are talking about. Mm-hmm. So Christy Front Drive's self-titled record came out that year. Braid, like you said, there's that Boy's Life record.
There's a Reason. Do you know who you are? Yeah, it's a strong emo year for sure. 96. It's probably. Is 96 the year that emo? I guess 96 and 97. Those are like the 2 years that emo kind of blew up. I was seeing if there are any other big ones.
There's also Indecision.
Oh yeah.
I hadn't listened to it that much, but I remember listening to it a little bit back then also.
Is that one? Which one is that one? I don't see it yet.
Unorthodox.
Yeah, the big one. Yeah, it's a dense year. There's a lot of really good stuff here.
Yeah, definitely.
This is, very, very strong year for sure. Well, let's get into the actual album you did select for us to talk about today. So I gave you the year 1996, and you selected Static Prevails by Jimmy Eat World. as I'd like to call them. So Jimmy Eat World formed in Mesa, Arizona in 1993. They originally had a more punk sound, or probably more pop punk sound, is how they would describe it. They had previously released a demo and EP before their first full-length album in 1994, which was a self-titled. After that point, they began becoming influenced by bands such as Sunny Day Real Estate and began to play around with some slower tempos. After extensive touring, the band began to attract the attention of some major labels, which leads us to this album. It is the band's second full-length album, released July 23rd, 1996 on Capitol Records. The personnel on this album is Rick Birch on bass, Zach Lind on drums, Jim Adkins on guitar and vocals, and Tom Linton on guitar and vocals. The album was produced by the band and Mark Trombino of Drive Like Jehu fame and Wes Kidd. The album was recorded at Sound City in Los Angeles and Big Fish in Encinitas. And there are some guest vocals on here on the song Digits by Eric Richter of Christie Front Drive. And I have some other stuff which we'll get to later. But first thing I always like to ask is, what made you choose this album?
So I remember hearing this for the first time. Actually, my boyfriend at the time worked at a record store in Pompano Beach, Florida, actually. And I think it was playing, and I heard it, and I actually bought the CD at the time, and I listened to it relentlessly at that time. And basically, I mean, I always loved Jim Adkins' voice and his melodic choices, and I think he probably, some of his choices actually influenced me to this day vocally. So yeah, I mean, it's just like he uses a lot of dynamics with his voice, where he's very like intimate and soft in parts, and then he belts, and I just always loved that.
It's interesting that you think it was around the same time that the album came out that you heard it.
I think so. Yeah, It was in, I remember, I think actually another person that worked at the record store, it's called Uncle Sam's, actually. I don't think it's there anymore in that spot. But yeah, it was playing in the store, and I bought the CD. So, wow. And then I just kept listening to it. Yeah, it was probably, I wasn't in bands at the time. It was way before I did it. Well, maybe not way before. I think the following years when I, recorded my first vocal backup on something. But yeah, it was before I'd actually been in bands myself.
Yeah, I guess it's exciting to me because like you're that very thing that Capitol Records was trying to find, like that audience in 96 to 97 that they had a hard time kind of getting, or at least Capitol didn't know what they wanted when it came to that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it just, to me, it was different than what I'd been listening to. Clearly, as you can see, what I was listening to at the time, a lot heavier and a lot more punk and hardcore. And that was like the first time that I had heard anything like that. And I know there was a lot of other music out there that sounded like that, but that was the first time that I had actually listened to anything like that. So yeah, it always stuck with me, and I have my favorites on the album that I still listen to, here and there.
Dylan, we've talked before a lot actually about Jimmy Eat World. We covered Clarity in the past, but so we kind of know like our history with the band itself. So Dylan, do you remember the first time you ever listened to Static Prevails?
Probably in college. I did a little bit of not really a deep dive. I mean, I guess going into college, I was like, I like Jimmy Eat World. I've always liked these singles. The emo revival thing was kind of happening around that time, and was just kind of generally exploring emo and stuff like that. And was like, I know this is an important band within emo, and it's kind of like one of those like mainstream crossover bands from, the Sunny Day Real Estate emo style towards the more pop punk stuff of the mid 2000s, and was like, so it was just kind of like kind of out of curiosity more than like feeling like super compelled. So I don't really have, I feel like I glossed over this record whenever I first heard it, and preferred Bleed American and Futures in terms of Jimmy Eat World records that I like really personally enjoyed. So I don't remember distinctly listening to it, though I know that I had, which I kind of had, so my memory of it is that it wasn't very memorable. That's kind of been my long-standing opinion of the record, was that, like, I know I've heard it, but it didn't stick. So there must be not something, they haven't found the thing that makes me really into Jimmy Eat World, I think, is probably the takeaway. But
yeah, I mean, I'll say, I think there's something about, like, it depends the first time that you've heard Jimmy Eat World, maybe that's why I have, like, a soft spot for that album, because sometimes people will say, like, like you said, Bleed American is my favorite album or whatever. And the same thing with, like, Smashing Pumpkins. Like, my favorite album may be different than someone else who grew up during a different time and they heard them for the first time on a different album, and that's probably the same for Jimmy Eat World. Like, Clarity is my all-time favorite Jimmy Eat World album, but this one, Static Prevails, has songs on it that I always go back to that I have a soft spot for, I guess. So that might be why.
Well, and listening to it for this episode, though, like, it was a really good opportunity to reevaluate it, because my impression of it now is very different. Like, this to me sounds like a band, firing on all cylinders. This to me sounds like a band that is, like, motivated and aspiring to a lot of things. And I think there are hints at what they would do later on this record, and, like, maybe execute more, like, in a more satisfying way, or, like, a more climactic way. But there's definitely a yearning and a passion on this record that is, like, it's really impressive to hear, especially when you consider, their legacy and their career and where they go, and really my own personal, like, forgotten, sense of this record, to, like, hear it and be like, oh wow, I was wrong. Like, this is memorable. This is engaging. This is something that I actually want to hear again, because it's and it's kind of it's a pretty unique record in their discography. I think it stands on its own. Like I said, you can see where they're going, but they're not there yet.
Yeah,
and
I agree with you.
I especially connected it with stuff that I would listen to later that I love, like Texas Is the Reason, or even, like, getting into, like, heavily into Rites of Spring and Embrace, and, like, kind of that first wave of emo bands, and being able to connect those dots on this listen was a lot of fun.
I was trying to remember if I'd ever actually heard this album before. For some reason, I'd always assumed that I'd listened to it, but whenever I actually listened to it to get ready for the show, I was like, I don't know that I have listened to this album. Maybe I've definitely heard songs, but I don't think I'd actually heard the entire album from front to back, which was surprising. I guess I'd always assumed I had, but yeah, so for me, listening to it, it felt almost like a first time listen, or if I did listen to it in the past, I just erased it from my brain. But going into it, I was like, okay, little disclosure, before we record, Dylan and we try and avoid talking about our opinions on albums before we get to the show, just because, we kind of want to save it. But Dylan did make a comment about it being forgettable, and that was before he had re-listened to it. And I was like, oh, is that what this is? So me going into it, I was like, I guess this is supposed to be forgettable. And then I listened to it, and I'm like, he's way wrong about that. He didn't get that right at all. Because this record, it's great. Like, it's a different sound for them, and that probably is as a result of Jim and Tom splitting the vocal duties of the record. But yeah, it's a very different sounding record. It kind of feels, if you really think about it, it feels more like the middle ground between Clarity and Bleed American, not so much the one before. But yeah, I really enjoyed just about everything I heard on this record, and I don't think there was anything on here where I was like, no thanks, pass. Like, the weakest songs on here, I was still like, good song, good chorus, good riffs.
Yeah, I mean, we're going on, my over a decade having listened to this record for the first time impression of it. So I was more than willing to be impressed and reevaluate it and change that opinion. And I'm glad that I did. Like, I'm glad that I had an opportunity to do this, because I don't know that I would have gone necessarily out of my way to go listen to this one. I think that prevailing opinion might have, I might have gotten to it eventually, but there's no urgency to do so. And which is kind of a shame, because I really enjoy it. Like, I think that there's something really special about the trading off of lead vocals, which is something that you really don't get in any other Jimmy Eat World records. And I love Jim Adkins' voice, and I think he is a really good singer and a great front man, and has some melodies that are really impressive, that are uniquely his. But Tom is not a slouch. Like, I don't know why he stopped altogether. I don't know. Maybe he just didn't want to sing. I guess maybe he just didn't feel like he was a good singer, but I think he sounds good. I was surprised at how much harder Jim sings on this record. He's definitely raspier and rawer edged than I expected.
Yeah, definitely. There are some parts where he really pushes himself in a different way. It's more raw. With Tom's voice, like episode 4, that song, I mean, I'm with you on, like, I hadn't listened to it in a while. And when I saw that was an option, I was like, oh yeah, I loved certain songs on that album. And there were some that I actually forgot about that I actually liked. And I was like, oh yeah, this is a good song too. Like episode 4, for example. That's where Tom is singing softly also, and he's doing something different. And it's a pretty cool song, So yeah, but it does, I agree. It does kind of like stand on its own. It's not typical for them. Like I guess they were finding their sound, but there's something special about it. It's like maybe less, less of what they became, I guess. Like, but it's still them. Just an interesting album for them.
Jim's voice he's like screaming almost in tracks on here, which I don't feel like you really get that from him on records going forward. He definitely is more mellow and calmer. And there's stuff on Bleed American where he's kind of like belting, but it's not like a scream or anything like that. So I was surprised to hear that on here. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, I know. His voice just sounds different on this album. Like, I think it was probably just he was trying to, maybe it was like without any vocal lessons or something, and so it was more raw, because once you have vocal lessons, it changes a little bit, and that might have been what happened, but that's part of why I like this album, is because it's very raw, and it's not like typical of some of like the poppier stuff, I guess, that they did later. And there are some parts that are just like really, like, you can feel the emotion. And he also does I noticed that he does a lot on this album. I can't think of songs later on that he did this as much, but there are certain layers that they do where their backup and the main are doing like two totally different things lyrically. Mm-hmm. That's really cool, so there's something about that. But yeah,
there's only a handful of songs on here where they're both the singers. And like part of me wishes we kind of lived in that alternative reality where that's what Jimmy Eat World did going forward, was more of like a hot water music singing over each other type thing that they would do.
Yeah.
'Cause it's just so different.
Yeah. Yeah, they have their voices are totally different.
There was a note that I read from the recording. Okay, it said staff members at Capitol asked Tom to tell Jim to stop screaming as he was doing it for the majority of World is Static. And Tom said, I was like, yeah, I can't tell him that because he'll just scream louder.
And that song, by the way, is a great song. It like kind of stops after the intro and then it comes in really strong, it's a cool song.
Yeah, that's one of my
funny.
favorite songs on the record. Yeah, it has the slower, kind of more traditional like emo guitar intro, and then it gets real loud, and it's a really fun song. I like that one a lot.
Yeah, I love that song. My two favorite songs on the album though are Claire and Anderson Mesa. Those two songs, and I guess they have a similar thing. They're kind of like quiet, and then they're really strong either midway or toward the end. Both of those songs, and just they're just powerful with the dynamics of like the very soft and quiet, and then just like the belting and just going nuts on the end, basically.
Yeah, Claire kind of feels like what they would do later. Like it's more the direction they would go. I guess you would say it's probably the quintessential Jimmy Eat World song from this record.
Yeah.
But yeah, that song's amazing. I love 17 as well. That's a faster song that it starts fast and then slows down. And then they do some really cool harmonies together on there and gets fast again too. Yeah,
that's a cool song too. Yeah. I mean, it's like they have some very quiet things and then some very energetic things. Call It in the Air is another great song. The energy on that song is great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but my two favorite of those, Anderson Mesa is just a really cool song. It's like quiet and soft, and then halfway through it just gets more intense, and the violins that they layered in there and everything is really, has a lot of emotion and like feeling for me.
I really enjoyed Rockstar as well because it felt, this is a Tom song, and it felt like they wrote the type of song that Capitol wanted them to write, because the reaction apparently from the label people was, oh, that's not what we expected whenever they gave them the finished album. And I don't know what they were expecting from this band. I guess because the first record was more of a straightforward punk album, maybe they thought they were going to get that. But I don't know if that's true, because they had already done stuff, some 7-inches and EPs that were more in this lane. Because I read a story that talked about the way the band got signed was the Capitol Talent Scout went to go see Sensefield play in the idea of trying to sign them, and then was super impressed by Christie Front Drive, who was opening before Sensefield. And so they got his attention, and then he asked them, he's like, hey, do you have any music for me to hear? So they gave him a copy of their split with Jimmy Eat World. Then he's like, okay, I'm going to go sign Jimmy Eat World. Like, he went to go see Jimmy Eat World and signed him off of that. And it was just, it's funny that there's a chance that Christie Front Drive could have been signed by Capitol at the time.
Oh.
And they gave it away.
They gave Jimmy.
Oh yeah, here's our split. Listen to this other band and sign them.
Oh no.
Yeah, I get the impression that Capitol was looking for a Sunny Day Real Estate. Like, it seems like they were looking for an emo band. They were trying to turn that into the next grunge in terms of it's kind of Jimmy Eat World is kind of alone in that category of the bands they got. I mean, I guess Sensefield got signed and then shelved by a major, but there weren't a lot of majors really shopping for emo bands in this time period the way that they had tried to, scoop up, punk bands and post Green Day, and there was, and I guess Sunny Day was certainly not like a huge band, but they were certainly fairly successful and definitely inspired a large wave of bands. So Jimmy Eat World really is the one that got signed, and then they weren't successful on a major, but then were successful as a band despite failing on a major. They really failed up in such a unique and interesting way. But the whole situation of them getting like, it seems like it's such a confusing, like it's strange, like because they got signed for one album with the option for 6.
Yeah.
So it's like, we're gonna do 1 and maybe we'll make you do 5 more. Which they did not end up doing.
Yeah.
And then like there was like an entire back and forth of like, you know, basically the label trying to make them stop being the band that they signed. Like, don't scream in the songs, and don't, you know, you need to rewrite these songs. You need to write different songs, because they got sent back to the studio to work on stuff and rewrite songs for this record. And then like also it's the fact that Mark Trombino even produced this record is like such a long shot, because they wanted to work with him, and then the label was like, no, you're going to work with more serious, professional producers that we want you to work with.
They wanted him to work with Tom Rothrock and Rob Schnapp, who'd worked with the Foo Fighters and Beck previously. So like, I guess they wanted a more Foo Fighters sounding thing. And I think that's why Rockstar sounds the way it does, is because that's maybe their attempt at like a big alternative rock song.
Interesting.
So
that would have been a totally different band.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's impressive that they were able to push back and, you know, maintain the producers that they wanted to work with. And I think that they made a record that sounds better than what they would have made. I think that an early Jimmy Eat World getting smushed into a Foo Fighters box would not have sounded good at all.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, you know, no wonder they weren't successful with the label, but at the same time it's like, thankfully they weren't. Like, thankfully they didn't do the things that they were expected to do, because they made something much better. What Capitol did in 96, but these majors are always so hard to like figure out. You have to go through so many like reissues to find them. I don't know. It's tough to. I wonder what else they had on the label that they would have considered Jimmy Eat World similar to. I don't know. I guess Foo Fighters. I just found a 1996 Doc Martens Capitol Records music sampler. That has Call It On The Air by Jimmy Eat World is on there. There's a Foo Fighters song on here. There's a Cocteau Twins song on here. Weird. Some of this stuff may be licensed through, or and some of it could be subsidiary labels too, because there's a bunch of other labels listed on here. But
so the Smoking Popes are on here, which I forgot. Smoking Popes were also a major label band at one point. But that actually makes sense, because right after the album came out, Jimmy Eat World toured with Smoking Popes to support it. So that actually really makes a little bit more sense. And then they did another tour right after that with Sincefield. So like, it's funny how long Sincefield was kind of being looked at for majors.
Yeah, they're a great band too.
Yeah.
We did a
Yeah.
run with them at one point, and that was a lot of fun too.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that was fun.
I never saw any of John Bunch's bands. He's such an incredible vocalist.
Yeah, totally. Really nice guy too.
Yeah. I've only ever heard great things.
Yeah, he was awesome. We did. I think that was with that was Rocking Horse, but I think it was with Further and Sensefield at the time. Actually, Further Seems Forever, Sensefield, and us, and it was a fun little run that we did at one point.
Yeah, that's an awesome package. That would be a great show to see. Man, you got a time machine I can borrow so I can go see that.
Yeah, that was fun. Those were good times.
Especially since John would later do the last Further, well, not the last Further record, but the last at the time Further record.
Yeah, definitely.
I found
really
it interesting that Rick Birch joined the band for this record. He replaced the original bassist Mitch Porter because Mitch's family was forcing him to go on a Mormon missionary. So
Interesting.
that's a very interesting decision on his part to be like, no, I can't be on this major label. I have to go be a Mormon mission.
Yeah.
Because my parents made me.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Mormon mission is a big thing. That's you got to go on mission. And I guess he was devout enough or practice it, because I know that Jimmy Eat World come from like a Mormon background. I want to say like most or if not all of the members were Mormon, but I don't think that I think Jimmy Eat World got in their way. At least Jim Adkins, I'm pretty sure, was Mormon, but I don't know that he still considers himself Mormon. But I don't know. Maybe he is. Just in like the way that like Low were like still consider themselves Mormon.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's not much in the like Jimmy Eat World discography that you would be like, this goes directly against the Mormon beliefs,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think their stuff is pretty universal.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing offensive probably in the music.
Yeah, like, do they ever even swear in any songs ever? I can't think of any.
Not that I know of. No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I'd have to go through like a fine-tooth comb to find it probably, but yeah.
No, I think everything's pretty universally accepted.
Yeah. It's funny. So the label was disappointed. They didn't like how it sounded, and then they didn't like how it sold. And so they basically were like, whatever, you're done. You can leave. We're not going to make you follow through with the 6-album deal. And then they leave and get another major label deal and do Clarity, and like it only goes up from there.
Well, Clarity was still with Capitol.
Was that a Capitol album too? I forgot the story already.
But that was the thing, was that they were disappointed with Static Prevails. They gave them another chance, and then they were like, we don't like this record either. And then they were like almost didn't release it. Like it was nearly shelved.
That's right. Because they made them go do an EP that wound up getting like actual radio play. And so then they were like, okay, fine, we'll release Clarity. That's right. I forgot that part of the story. But then they were still unhappy with how Clarity did. And so just we're like, bye. And then they go and do Bleed American
for DreamWorks.
Yeah.
I think that's always, the risk with signing to a major. It's like you may be excited and get this, all this hype and everything, but then if it falls flat, you're just dropped. Or the album in some cases I've heard albums being shelved and never heard.
Yeah.
And that's the risk,
Yeah, it happened to Sensefield. They had their album shelved and it leaked, but it was shelved and never officially released.
Yeah, and that's the problem, I guess, with signing to majors. It's like, it's a risk. And then, if you're told what to do and you don't want to do it, they never see the light of day.
Yeah.
If the management changes at the label, that was one of the other big factors with Jimmy Eat World, was the president changed, and he's like, I don't care about this band. I don't like it. Get rid of him. Like, it's just your A&R guy might leave, and then you're just like, well, now nobody at the label knows me. The guy that signed me, who gets what we're doing, is gone.
Yeah, that's the thing. Because you're just one of the cogs, I guess, at that point.
Yeah, and I guess it's, I'm not going to shed tears over how the record industry, as far as like the majors, has gone since then, but it may be some of that behavior, maybe why it's like, oh yeah, that's why you guys kind of collapsed, to the degree you did, and now it just relies entirely on just solo artists for major label stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why sometimes it's better to have somebody, a label like we do, like for Iodine. Like Casey cares about the bands, and he does what he can. He puts his heart and soul into the releases, and that's I guess that's something that can be said for indie labels.
Yeah, because there's always the likelihood of an indie label really pushing back on the band to do a certain thing is not very high, because why did you sign them in the first place if you didn't want them to be who they were, So yeah,
exactly.
The record,
totally.
So Static Prevails, it develops I guess you would say a cult following. It's not typically referred to as like one of the great Jimmy Eat World albums, but there are a few publications that cite it as like it was a pretty important album for the time. This was like the highest profile emo band essentially, and by being on a major, it kind of gained them new fans and opened the doors for other bands. And it's historically, I guess you can view it as a stepping stone album, but whereas like Clarity is probably like the big one for this type of music, but it has its place, and it has a dedicated fan base for sure.
It led to them getting to meet Drew Barrymore,
right?
So that's cool for them.
Yeah, because the song 17 wound up being used in the movie Never Been Kissed, which was in 99, so like 3 years after.
Yeah. Wow, well, that's something I never knew.
Yeah, it's on the soundtrack and actually played in the movie, not just one of those only on the soundtrack songs that used to happen.
Yeah, that's cool.
Actually, I think the soundtrack has Lucky Denver Mint on it.
Mm.
Oh, weird.
I think the song is in the movie. I think 17 is in the movie, but it's not on the soundtrack.
Okay. Weird. Soundtracks were so weird back then. They were just like the label just being like, here, put all of our label bands on the soundtrack. It's like, are they in the movie? Not all of them.
Yeah. That's strange. Or maybe they're during the credits at the very end or something.
Right.
Yeah. That was weird.
Any final thoughts on the album from either of you?
No, I mean, I don't know. It's just, like I said, I have my favorites. I still go back to them, and I think it definitely stands alone. It's not exactly like the other albums that have come out since then, and there's just something really cool about it. And I think they were just kind of finding their sound still at that point. But yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites that I go back to time and again.
Dylan?
I think that's up for me.
Okay. Yeah, I would like them to. I don't think we'll ever get anything like this album again from them, but it would be fun if they would do something in this lane once again. I don't know. Who knows? We'll probably never get that, but I think it'd be a fun little throwback. I wonder, I haven't looked at any of their set lists to see. I wonder if they play anything off of this record still.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, that is an interesting question. When was the last time they played anything from...
They didn't do this album with those live things. That wasn't one of them.
Yeah, they just did that Clarity thing. That was so awesome. I watched that, actually. That was really cool.
Yeah,
but I've never...
What were the ones they did? They did Clarity. They did Futures. Because they did like 4 of them. And Chase This Light, maybe. Let's see. Oh, I forgot they played When We Were Young.
They played... Hey, look at this. They played Thinking That's All most recently on October 4th, 2022.
Oh, yeah. So that's not that long ago.
They played Claire in 2021, Rockstar in 2022. So they pull some of these out from time to time.
That's awesome.
That'd be fun to hear Rockstar, because I bet Tom gets to sing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, cool. Well, I think that's everything on the album. So where should everyone be following The Darling Fire online?
Yeah, so we have Facebook, Instagram, the Darling Fire Official on Instagram. That's where we post most of our content. Iodine has some of our information, and the Iodine YouTube actually has our video as well for rituals. But mostly, I would say most of our content is on Instagram. That's where the best place to find us.
Cool. I'll put that in the show notes for everyone to see. Well, Jolie, thank you so much for doing the show. I really enjoyed talking about this record and talking about The Darling Fire with you.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
To order Punk, call the number on your screen. Rush delivery is available. Remember, this special offer is not sold in stores.